This chapter gave us the tools we need to look at the data in our files. Let's start by opening up the ice rink example file here for Chapter 7. Click Open. Imagine that we were given this AutoCAD drawing by our supervisor so that we can take some measurements on it and help make some construction estimates, something that's very practical and often done. So that's what we're going to do for this chapter project. AutoCAD can be used for more than just drawing things. Once something is drawn or modeled, we can use the CAD to get real-life information about things very quickly, and we can even perform some calculations. We need to know the area of the ice rinks. We have 3 of them here. So let's open up the Properties palette. Press Ctrl+1 to open it up. Now let's select the outer shape of the rink and read it off. Right here. It's a closed polyline, so we can get the area very quickly and instantly right here. Now this is in square units, and for our sake of argument, that's all we care about. We don't really care what those units are, just that they're in some sort of unit. So we see here that one area is 17,221 square units. All 3 rinks should be the same size. Well, let's pick them all. We still have this one selected. If you've unselected it, go ahead and pick it. Select the second rink, and now the third rink. And now we see that the area is still the same for all 3. One thing you can't do with a Properties palette is get a cumulative area of polylines. Now, hatches you can, but we don't have enough hatches to add everything up. Well, we could do some basic math and just multiply this number by 3, and there you go, but we don't want to do the math, do we? So let's get the total. Let's use our Measure Geom command. Come over here to the Home tab on the ribbon, into the Utilities panel, and click on the measure arrow and click Area. Now remember, we want to add all 3 areas up together. So you have to start with the add function. So type in the letter A for add, and now O for object. No need to pick all of this. We'll just select our objects. Once all 3 have been picked, we'll press Enter, and we see our individual area, the perimeter, and our total area for all 3, which is what we were looking for. Press Enter. Let's exit out of here again. Press F2. And we have our total area right here. Now we can copy this out, paste it into an email, and send it off to our boss. Project done. We're ready to go home. Not quite. What's the perimeter of the rink? It's like, oh, okay. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, we need to find the distance. We want to find multiple points. So make sure you type in M for multiple points, but not until your first point. If you start off typing it in, AutoCAD just gives you that, hey, invalid point. What were you doing? You dummy. Do it the right way. So we pick our first point. Now we can tell it M for multiple, or you can click right here on the command line. And we just want a quick estimate here, so we won't go through all of the details, just the major ones. Remember, your scroll wheel can pan, zoom, and move you about while you're working inside this command, which is extremely useful. I suggest that's the way you do it, as opposed to using the pan or zoom commands transparently, as we discussed previously in other chapters. But using these tools in the middle of a command for something like this makes everything so much easier. Pick your last point, press Enter, and there's our distance, or our perimeter, 1,477 units and some change left over. Now that we have this information, we need to clean up this drawing for our boss, because he wants us to email it to the client. So let's make sure that it's as small as it can be and that we don't give the client anything that they don't need. So start the purge command. Let's make sure the purge nested items have been selected, and we do want to get rid of everything, so hit the purge all items, Click close, and there we go. So now we're ready to send this file once we've saved it and get it to the client in a small and efficient manner. Oh, wait a minute. The boss just came up and he says that he wants to add another rink into the plan for the client because they requested it. Well, that happens all the time. We need to get our blocks and our layers back. Okay, well, we haven't closed the file yet, so it's still safe, even though we saved it. So what we need to do is go back to the undo and get rid of the purge. All right, now let's test it out. If we type the purge command in again, yep, everything's still listed. We're good to go. Save the file, and we're ready to draw another rink. But of course, then we're going to have to get new measurements. AutoCAD has many tools available in it to ensure that we draw as precisely as we possibly want to. In fact, the amount of accuracy available in AutoCAD is simply amazing. One of the most common and most important accuracy tools in AutoCAD is the O-snap feature. We've talked about O-snaps in the past and we've briefly gone over them, but now is the time in which I want to go over them and dig deep into them. O-snap is short for Object Snap, and there are many ways to gain access to them. To help out, let's open up a file, go to the folder for Chapter 8, and open up the Blocks and Tables file. You've seen this file before, and there's a lot of stuff in it, making it easy to demonstrate many different things in AutoCAD. So let's look at O-snaps. What do they do? Well, an O-snap makes sure that you place an object or select an object in a very specific location or place on that object. You can enter in an O-snap by typing in an alias on the command line. You can use them through shortcut menus, or you can use them with running O-snaps. Running O-snaps keep the O-snaps on all of the time. They're on, they're running, just like your refrigerator is running. To toggle that off and on, press the F3 button. And when you do, your command line will tell you if they've been turned off or turned on. You can also go to the status bar down here in the bottom, and you can click this icon. If the icon is highlighted blue like it is now, that means it's on. Now it's turned off, you see it's not highlighted. To set which of your running O-snaps are active, you just type in OS on the command line. Just think O-snap or Object Snap, and press Enter. And go to the Object Snap tab. Here you have a lot of controls over a lot of different drafting tools, but we want to go to the Object Snap. You can toggle the O-snap off and on right here, the running O-snaps. And here you can select which ones are on. You can select them all by pressing this button, or turn them all off by clicking the Clear All button, and then pick which ones that you want to have running. Typically for me, I'll keep everything on except for nearest and parallel. We'll talk about each one of these here in a few moments. Most of them are self-explanatory, and you'd be able to figure them out all on your own anyway, I'm sure. But let's go ahead and look at them. If you put your mouse over them, the cursor, it will tell you what it does. The endpoint snaps to the closest endpoint or corner of an object, such as an arc line, multi-line, polyline, segment, spline, region, 3D object, etc. If it's a line or an arc, a polyline, or any object that has an end to it, or a corner, that's an endpoint. Now, you see the name here, and the middle part is the checkbox. That turns it on, that turns it off. So if it has a check in it, it's on. If it doesn't, it's off. Now, this picture on the left of each one is its glyph. When you go to snap to an endpoint, AutoCAD will draw a box at that endpoint. It will tell you where it is. If you're snapping to the midpoint, which is the middle of that object, then the glyph will look like a triangle. And the circle's center or an arc's center looks like a circle, a node, which is on a point, a quadrant, which is on a circle or arc or ellipse, etc. Each of these has its own specific glyph. That way you know what you're snapping to. So if I'm going to draw a line to the endpoint of this arc, that green box right above my crosshairs is where it's going to go to. That's my endpoint. And if your pop-ups are on, it will also tell you endpoint, so you know. This is a quadrant. The triangle is the midpoint. And right here is the center of that arc. Now, the center of an arc can be difficult to get to. Center of a circle is not so difficult because they're typically real close to it. But what you have to do is hover over that circle or arc first, and you'll see that little plus sign come up. That tells you where the center is. Then you go to it before it disappears, and it will select the center of that object. And there you go. I drew a line from the center of that circle. So we have an endpoint, we have a midpoint, which is the middle of an object, and that object has to have endpoints to it. So you can't go to the midpoint of a circle because, well, this circle has no beginning, it has no end, so it can't have a middle. This arc, though, does. It has a beginning and an end point, so it can have a middle point. The center is for a circle, an arc, or an ellipse. Puts you right in the center of that. A node snaps to a point object or to specific areas on a dimension, and those are called dimension points. And those dimension points are your point A and point B of the length that you're measuring. And the quadrant will go to, well, the quadrant point of a circle and an arc, or even an ellipse. Quadrant point is all the way up on the circle, all the way down, left and right, as you can kind of see on these plus signs or these lines here on this symbol here showing a light. Now, an intersection are just where two, objects align. An arc, a circle, anything, wherever they cross each other. An extension, which is kind of cool, it makes a temporary extension. It takes the object like a line or an arc, and even though the line ends, it will continue on about that pathway until you could go and get to another point. So that helps a lot. The insertion point is for a block. So when you insert a block, and we'll talk about blocks later on, but this circle with the lines on it that represents a light fixture is a block. A block is just a series of lines, circles, text, different objects together that make up one object. You can edit that in the block editor, create some, you can copy them, delete them, move them, rotate them, etc. But it has, as every block does, an insertion point. So when you insert that block, that's the base point for the block. And that's what this insertion snap point is. Now the perpendicular will do just that. It will draw a line perpendicular to the selected object. Let me demonstrate the perpendicular one to you. If I have this line here and I want to draw a line, another line from any point, I can draw it over here, and I want it to be 90 degrees to that existing line. Well, I can type in PER for perpendicular, press enter, and no matter where I go on this line, you see where that glyph is, that green glyph? That's where I'm going to go, and it's going to make it perpendicular. So if I draw a line over here, type in PER, press enter, I'm going to automatically draw a line that's perpendicular to that line from my starting point. Now here's something that's kind of cool too. You can also go perpendicular to an arc. If I type in PER, it goes right there. Now essentially a perpendicular line to an arc is radial, meaning it assumes that I'm coming straight from the center of the circle to this endpoint where I started from. As you can see, it's a straight line. So that's kind of neat. So perpendicular can do a lot of different things. And tangent, well, that will draw a line that's tangent to a circle or an arc. Nearest is tricky because it will just put whatever you're drawing wherever. So if I'm clearing everything off and I'm using the nearest, if I want to draw a line to anywhere on this arc, I can. See, my nearest glyph comes up and it's just picking the point that's closest to where my crosshair is on that object at the time. So if I just want to make sure my line goes to that object, see, I can zoom in as close as I want, make sure I refresh the screen, and it's this line and this arc, they both meet right at that endpoint. So that's why I turn off the nearest, because let me show you. If I turn everything on and I try to draw a line, everything's near. I can accidentally pick the wrong spot, and it's making it difficult to snap to even the endpoint. You really have to get right at the end. Whereas if I turn that off, click OK, draw my line, now I get to my perpendicular spot, my endpoint, or I can even get to a midpoint here. Right there it is. I don't have to be dead on to get to those snap points. I can be relatively close. But with the nearest on, I have to get right on them. And again, if I do want to get near, just as with all O snaps, I can always type it right in. And whatever you type in will override all of your running O snaps. So now, even if I zoom in as close as I possibly can here, I'm not going to snap to the endpoint unless I just happen to pick it. And we'll continue to look at the various O snaps in the next movie. And now, continuing our look at the various O snaps, we have apparent intersection. Apparent intersection is really cool, and I like this one a lot. It will snap to what would be an intersection point if the two objects continued on and actually intersected each other. So if I click OK, and I draw a line here, this line and this line do not intersect because this one stops. But if it did, it would continue on and intersect somewhere around here. So I can draw another line from anywhere, and let's say I want to intersect it. I just kind of hover over this line and hover over this line. And now you can see it extends it, finds the intersection, and clicks on there. So that can be very useful. Otherwise, I would have to extend this line, draw my line, and then trim it back to wherever I was before. And since I didn't mark where I was before, I don't really know where I was before. So you have several steps that you have to take to be able to find that intersection that, well, I no longer have to take with that running O snap turned on. Now, it can be very tricky to get it to show up. But let me show you again. Start a line. Now, I've got to kind of pick the line. Pick it and hold it. I mean, not selecting with my mouse, just hovering over it so that the O snap glyph comes up. Then go to my next object. I kind of got to grab them both. And now I can get to it. It works best if you pick your first point first, and then you pick the line that can be extended or that would be extended with it, in the case here. And there you go. And if you can't get the hang of it, you can't seem to get it to work, it is tricky. It is difficult. And I've been doing this for a long time, so I've had a lot of practice at it. Now, so don't worry if you don't get it. If you don't, just draw some construction lines in there and have at it. Now, parallel, I usually keep off because it can make things difficult to draw sometimes. So if I start a line, you can see the glyph as I'm trying to pick on here. It does a lot of things to me like the nearest did. It keeps wanting to make something parallel. And a lot of times it's hard to get it to work correctly. So that's why I typically keep it turned off. If I want a parallel line, I'll use the offset command. See, that's easy, and I know that it's parallel. It's much easier to use the parallels O snap by typing it in, by locking that in. The running O snaps aren't locked in. If you come to a more appropriate O-snap, it will automatically switch to that. So if I turn on the parallel running O-snap and then I'm trying to draw that, sometimes it will give me an endpoint or a midpoint, etc. But if I type it in PAR, then I pick my object I want to parallel, I'm locked in here to the parallel line. See, I can't draw anything else really. It gives me that error, said, hey, look, dude, you need another point here. And boom, that green line comes in, and wherever I click now, that line is parallel. So that's why I keep the running O-snaps all on except for nearest and parallel, because they're a bit tricky to use that way. So that's what they all do. You can use whichever ones you want, because you can always get to your O-snaps by just typing them in. Or if you're starting a command and you have your right-click shortcuts turned on, hold down the Shift key and then right-click. And here are all of your O-snaps right here. You can get all of them and a few extras. You can also get to your O-snap settings this way. So if you're working and you find out that you don't have your proper running O-snaps on, instead of exiting out of the command and starting over, just Shift, right-click, O-snap settings. And there you go. Now I want to go back to some of these settings here. I want to talk about what's called object snap tracking. I like object snap tracking. With this, the cursor can track along alignment paths, of different objects, based off of other object snap points. And then when specific points are set up, then you can use them right in the command. A lot like that apparent intersection that you saw. So this is cool. You can press F11 to turn those off or on, or you can come down here to the status bar and click right here. If you go to your O-snap settings, you can also toggle that on or off right here, object snap tracking. Click OK. Now watch what I can do. Let's say I want to draw a line that is on this line if the line extended out to this endpoint. So what I do is I find the endpoint here and I can track down. As you can see right here, it's not intersecting anything, but that green little glyph needs to be present. You can see it right there. And now I come and do the same thing here, hover over it, wait, take a breath, count to 1. And now this will track. And as I get to that intersection point right there, I can click. So you can do a lot of cool stuff without having to create construction lines. See, I could draw a construction line, make it perpendicular, move this line so that I know it's right at the end, draw another line here, it's perpendicular. That's my point right there. Draw a line and draw to that endpoint, and now go back and erase those two objects. That's a lot of extra work. Whereas all I have to do is start here with my tracking on, find my endpoint, extend out, find this endpoint, and extend back. There's my intersection, boom, I'm done. And again, it can be tricky to use. You have to follow something exactly. You have to follow the path. You can't really be shaky as you go about. You can see that things are going to move and it's going to pick up other trackable points. But I can do that with any snap point. Here's a perpendicular line. I can move it and see it's tracking up or even perpendicular, or this intersection point. I can do a lot of different things. And just the slightest bit of movement can take it off of that pathway. So you have to be careful. And the trick is to find a snap, wait a second, let it get a hold of it, make sure that little green plus sign is there, find another snap point. So you can see I'm already extending it because it's finding out something real close, and then boom, I just drew a line to that intersection point. So these things can really help you out. They can be a bit tricky to use, but they can be very useful because they can save you some time and having to create construction lines to do your drafting work, and then erasing those construction lines. Now there's another tracking feature that I want to show you, and that's called polar tracking. This feature allows you to snap to specific angles when you're drawing. Just press F10 to toggle the polar tracking off or on, or come down here to the status bar. Click the button. Now if you type in OS, that will get you to your drafting settings again, and you can go to the polar tracking option right here. You can turn it off, turn it on. You can add angles or set up to specific increments of angles. So if I want to snap to every 90 degrees, I can. That's kind of cool because then you can draw orthogonally without turning your ortho command off and on. It's up to you. You can do every 45, every 30, 22.5, etc. Let's pick 15. Click OK. So now when I draw a line, every 15 degrees, I'm going to get that green line. And I'm going to be able to track across that green line. So here's 0, 15, 30, 45, etc. So I can draw lines here real quickly. 0, 60, 135, 165, 75. You get the idea. So that's kind of cool. So if you're trying to draw an isometric view or like a P&ID drawing, you can use the polar tracking to draw at those angles very quickly without having to type in that information. This is a time-saving tool. And if the angle that you want to use is not in here, just click on the new, and let's say it's an angle, even a weird angle of 3.14. Press enter. And now that's added into it. So what's cool here is that I'm going to draw a line at 3.14 degrees, every 3.14 degrees, and still at every 15 degrees because I have that turned on. So you can delete it or add to it. Or if I want to go every 45 degrees, let's turn on additional, let's say 20 degrees. Click OK. So I'll be able to draw a line at 20 degrees, at 45 degrees, etc. So when you're drawing and you want to draw accurately, you can use your O-snaps. You can always have your running O-snaps on and they're quickly toggled off. You can use your object snap tracking to help you get or to help you access those snaps even more so and to eliminate construction lines. And you can also use your polar tracking to help you draw at specific angles, but not be locked into those angles. All of these tools, once mastered, will help you to draw more accurately with less steps, and that's ultimately our goal. We've seen this next feature demonstrated many times, and we've used it even many more. And it might be one of the most commonly used features in AutoCAD to aid someone in drafting. I'm talking about the ortho feature. Ortho makes sure that you draw something or move something orthogonally or set at a 90-degree angle. To toggle it on or off, press the F8 key or click right down here on the status bar. With the ortho command on, your cursor movements are constrained to a horizontal or vertical movement based on your user coordinate system. That means you will draw lines or move objects again in a straight horizontal or vertical motion. If you take a look at your UCS icon, which is the X and the Y icon, right down here on the bottom left hand of my screen, the orthogonal movements are about those axes. So perfectly horizontal for the X, perfectly vertical for the Y. If I draw a line, it's only going to go horizontal or vertical. And that's it. I can't draw a line at a 45-degree angle unless I type it in There you go. So ortho will help you draw straight up and down, straight left and right, or it will help you to only move in those directions. So I can only copy this circle or move this circle horizontally left, right, or vertically up and down. See, wherever I put my mouse, those are the only options I have. Now, if I rotate the UCS, see, I can't rotate them in any other way right now unless I turn off the ortho. Now I can rotate them. And they match my crosshairs, so that's another way to know. If I turn it back on and I draw lines, it follows my X and Y axes. So it will follow those orthogonal projections of the X and the Y axis. Now, what I'm about to show you, you can't do in AutoCAD LT because it doesn't have 3D functionality. But if I rotate my axes here, or my view, and I turn on ortho, I can also draw in the Z axes. So you have X, Y, and Z. That's the only way you're going to draw. That's what ortho does for you. One of the keys to working with AutoCAD is efficient editing techniques. One way to quickly modify an object is through grips and grip editing. You can drag grips to perform any stretch, move, rotate, scale, mirror, or various other different types of operations. Grips are small, solid-filled squares colored blue that are displayed at strategic points on an object that you've selected. So if I select this arc, these blue squares are its grips. When grips are turned on, you can select the objects that you want to manipulate before entering a command. So meaning you don't start a command, then turn on grips. You just turn on the grips by selecting the objects. Very simple. Once selected, you can use the grips to manipulate the objects with your cursor very easily. So to use a grip, you just find one, pick it, and then you can move things around. I'm going to turn off the ortho command so we can see things a little bit better. See, as I move this around, I'm stretching this endpoint. So it does the exact same thing as a stretch command. As you can see, these two grips, which are based on the endpoint and midpoint of this arc, stay where they're at. Nothing else is changed. The only other thing that is changing, though, is the center of my arc. You can see how my radius is changing, and AutoCAD's telling me what's being changed on it. I just pick a new point, and there we go. Now, the midpoint will allow me to move it by keeping the endpoints. This endpoint's the same as the other one, and the center grip just means I can move the object. Now you can see here, when I hover over this grip, I don't pick it, I get two options, stretch and radius. Well, the stretch is that moving thing that I did before, and radius allows me to change the radius based on the midpoint and the center point. Those will be held, so our endpoints are going to move. So I can just type in the new radius of whatever I want it to be. Say 6 feet. And that's basically how grips work. Different grip types, meaning a midpoint, center, endpoint, will have different extra functions. And that is going to vary depending on the type of object. So like the endpoint of an arc, and the line will be the same way, will allow me to stretch it, and it moves that endpoint around, or lengthen it. So I'm lengthening this arc, and I can type in the number of degrees it's going to go to, or I can just pick a point, and there it goes. A line's grips are very similar to an arc's. My midpoint allows me to use the stretch command for the whole object, or I can stretch the endpoint or lengthen the line. That's a great way to quickly make a line longer or shorter, or to even move it. And I don't need any commands to do that. Just select your objects, and you can pick more than one, though the only thing changed is going to be the grip that you're selecting. But what you can do is hot grip something. So if I select the line and the arc, and I hold down the Shift key, and I pick multiple grips, the relationship between those hot grips, that's what these are called, hot grips, they turn red, like red hot. This relationship of these 3 points, the way they relate to geometrically, will not change. So now I can pick any of these, and it's like using the stretch command, and those 3 points will always remain at the same geometric relationship. So I can hot grip this endpoint and this midpoint, and now those 2 points stay the same, but the endpoints on my arc and the other endpoint of the line will move. Let's take a look at some other types of grips. If we have a circle, there are no endpoints involved in this, like with the line and arc, but it does have grips that you can use. The center point is just a move, so that'll move your circle around. The quadrant grips will allow you to change the radius or the diameter of your circle. So you can just type in what you want it to be. So right now, it's at about 5 feet. So now we can change it by typing in 3 feet. And now it's 3 feet. Now, most of the grips, like that are on the endpoints, are stretch. It's just like a stretch command. You pick it and you move it somewhere else. For example, if I use the stretch command, select the end of that line, see, it's the same thing. How much easier is that? 3 clicks. That's why grips are efficient, and that's why they help you do the exact same thing, but in a quicker and better way. Now, you can also move with grips. As you saw earlier, a lot of those are the midpoint or the centers. I can also select multiple grips here, and then hot grip them. And now I'm moving these 2 items together. But you also have to keep in account of what those grips do. So in this case, I'm changing the radius and the line at the same time. Now there are some other things that you can do with grips. So if I select an object, hot grip it, press the space bar, I can do a couple of different things. I can use the move, press the space bar again. Now I can rotate, space bar again, and it's a scale option. Space bar again, I can mirror the item, and space bar again is a stretch. So let me show you that one more time. If I draw a polyline, and it's an odd shape, press enter. I select it, and I grip something. It defaults to the stretch command, but if I press the space bar, now it turns into a move command. And you can tell that by looking at your command line. See, it starts off with stretch and then goes to move. And you have different options. You can copy it on a move, which is a great way to use the copy command without ever using the copy command. Press spacebar again, and it kind of takes you out. You have to pick your item again. So press spacebar, it's in the move. Press it again, now it's rotate. So it rotates the entire object based on the grip point that you selected. Now you can just pick your point, or you can type in the angles that you want it to rotate to. Pick your grip again. Press the spacebar until I get scale. Now, as I move my mouse back and forth, it measures the distance in units from the selected base point to where my crosshairs are. Now I'm at 5 feet 6 inches away, so that's 66 units. So I'm scaling this object by 66 units. Now I can move my mouse around, or I can just say 2 and make it twice as big. So if I pick my point one more time, keep pressing the space bar until I get to where I want, now I can mirror my object. And those are how you use grip edits. So you're going to find different grip edits for different types of objects, like the line. When you do, hover over the grip and you'll get this other box that will show you some extra features you can use. Or you can just pick it and start stretching. That's the default functionality. And remember, press the space bar, and that will toggle you through the list of options that you have available to you when you grip edit in grip edit mode on your object. AutoCAD uses something called layers. They're used to group information in a drawing by function and to also enforce line type, color, and other standards like that. Layers are the equivalent of the overlays used in old-time paper-based drafting. Layers are our primary organizational tool in order to control the visual display of our objects. By creating layers, you can associate similar types of objects by assigning them to the same layer. For example, you can put construction lines on a layer. You can put text on their own layer, or dimensions, or the title block information on their own layer. You can then control the following: whether the objects on a layer are visible in any viewport in any instance. You can control whether and how objects are printed. You can control what color is assigned to the objects on the layer. You can control what default line types and line weights are assigned to all of the objects on that layer. You can also define or control objects on a layer and how they can be modified, or even if they can be modified. You can control whether objects are displayed with different layer properties in individual layout viewports. Every drawing includes a layer named 0. Layer 0 cannot be deleted or renamed. It has two purposes. One is to ensure that every drawing includes at least one layer. And second, it provides a special layer that relates to controlling colors and blocks. It is recommended by me and other CAD users that you create several new layers with which to organize your drawing with, rather than create your entire drawing on layer 0. If we open up the architectural example file for Chapter 9, we'll see here in this file that it has several different layers in it. Each layer contains specific data on it. On the Home tab in your ribbon, there is a Layers panel. There are a lot of buttons here. That's because layers have a lot of different settings. The more settings that something has in AutoCAD, the more important it is. Two good examples of that are layers and dimensions. These are two very important critical points to make sure you understand how to properly use and apply them in your drawings, because they will control everything, especially the layers. So we have here in this pull down the current layer. That means whatever I draw will be on this layer. If you look in your properties palette, it will tell you the current layer. You can change your current layer by clicking here in the properties panel. On the arrow, it will pull down a list that you can scroll through if long enough, showing you what layers are available. Now, in this one, we have layer 0, which is found in all drawings, def points, which is also an AutoCAD-based and generated layer. That has to work with dimensions. We'll talk about it a little bit later. Now, these layers here, doors, viewport, wall, windows, these were all created by me when I made the file. All of the doors are on the door layer. The viewport layer, which we'll talk about later on, has all the viewports on it. That's something we'll use in Paperspace when we go to demonstrate and show and display how we use the layers. Now, there's also a wall layer and a windows layer. This is a very short list, to be quite honest. Most drawings, well, there is no most drawings. Many drawings will have so many different layers in it, it could astound you. Where I'm currently employed at full time, our template file has over 2,500 layers in it. It's absurd the amount of layers. So that's why you have to understand how to use layers, when to use them and when not to. All of these buttons on here will do something that you're going to want to need to know how to do. We're going to go over the majority of them. Some of them you'll hardly ever touch, while others you'll use constantly. This pull down for the layers works very similarly to the one in the properties panel. Wall is a current layer. To switch to a different layer, pick it. And you can see here in the properties palette that we have, it gives you your current layer. So when I draw a line, it's going to be that color. Now if I switch current layers to the wall layer, it's going to be this dark brownish maroon color. So you control the visual display of your objects through layers. Now I can control these objects by themselves, but I'm using the by layer functionality. We'll talk more about it later, but I can override this and make it red if I want to. But if I change the layer settings to a different color like blue, this will stay red, but everything else on that layer will turn blue. Use by layer all the time. There are rare exceptions when it's appropriate and or acceptable to use the layer settings, but stay away from it. Let's go through some of these buttons. This is the Layer Properties button. You click it to open up the Layer Properties Manager. Now the Layer Properties Manager is a palette. So you can dock it, you can stretch it, you can hide it, you can do anything you want to it that you can do to a regular palette. You can dock it in up high, you can move it down low. You can pick anywhere on these and kind of move the columns around. You can stretch it out. And you can see here that there is a lot of information about your layers. If you're getting overwhelmed or frightened by all the buttons, it's okay. We're going to go through all of these things throughout the next series of sections. But to close the palette, you just click on the X. This button here will make an objects layer current. So if I select this door, up here, this isn't current, but it's telling you that's what layer it's on. If I click here, this will make this object's layer current. So that's a great tool to remember to use. If you want to switch between different objects layers, you can. Just select the object and click on the Make Current button. That's one way to switch, and it's one way, hey, I need to draw a door. So I can come up to this list and try to scroll through it, but if it's really long, then finding the door layer may be difficult. I can pick the door and just say, make it current. And now I can draw a new door and it'll be on the right layer. This is called the layer match or match layer. I select it, and now I pick all the objects that I want to change. So let's say I want all of these walls here to change. I select them, press enter, and now I pick an object that has the properties that I want them to match. So that's a great tool. If you're drawing on the wrong layer or you need to switch something for some reason, for any reason, you can do that very quickly. These layers here are called isolate. This will hide all of these layers. So it hides everything else except for the layers that I selected. It isolates them. It basically turns the other layers off. If I pick the unisolate, it puts everything back to the way it was. It doesn't delete them, it just hides them so I can't select them. So that's a great way to isolate your walls, make some changes. Like, let's see, let's delete that. Or if we were to do some other things, we could unisolate everything, and that brings it back. So we can edit on a specific type of object, like just the walls, or just the doors, or just the windows, without having the other items get in your way and keeping them safe. Now you can freeze layers or turn layers off. We'll discuss a little bit later the difference, but what it will do is it makes them invisible, turns them off. They're still there. You can't select them or anything, but you can go to your layer manager, type in LA, and you can see here they're frozen. If I pick this, they'll come back. Turning layers off kind of does the same thing. Now, they'll be affected differently in viewports, and you can do different things the way they're loaded, and we'll talk more about that later on. But for now, you can turn them back on. And you have your freeze or your off. These are different layer states. You can put your layers in a specific way. Certain colors, certain ones off, certain ones frozen, and you can save that in a state. So you can easily replace that or reinstate that layer system the way you had it set up before. So if you want to work with just the walls, you can say walls, and give it a layer state where it turns everything off but the walls. Or maybe you want walls and doors. You can do that. Some of these other buttons here will turn all the layers on, will thaw all the layers. These will lock or unlock a layer. If you lock a layer, then that means anything that's on that layer, any walls, roads, windows, doors, ceilings, whatever it is, you can't edit the objects that are on that layer. You can add new objects to it, but you can't take them off. So if you're making an architectural drawing, like in this case, and you want to make sure the walls stay, say don't accidentally mess them up, lock that layer. This will change the current layer. Changes the current layer of a selected object to the current one. So you can see it changed this layer that we selected, this object, and it changed it to the current layer. That's another way to change your object's layer types. Then we have a copy objects to a new layer, so that you can copy your object and it will put it on another layer than what it's on. The layer walk. This will show you what you have in types of layers. If you pick it, this is what it is. And as you select the objects, it just shows you what's on those layers. Doesn't do anything to the drawing, but it kind of tells you, hey, well, what's this door layer? Well, what does that have on it? Well, of course, it's the doors. The VP freeze will freeze that layer in all viewports except the one you're currently working in. Well, that's nice when you're using paper space and you make other views and viewports and you're creating some new line work and you don't want that line work to show up in the other views. Click it here and it will turn them off, or actually it will freeze them, not turn them off, so that they won't be displayed, except for the one you're working in. The merge will just select layers, put them onto one target layer. It'll remove all the other layers from the drawing, so it cleans it up. And this is one thing that you can use if you get drawings that are very old from someone else who didn't have very good standards, on their layer management styles. And put them all in one place, and then you can sort it out. It might make things a bit easier. And if you have a layer that's not being used, you can delete the layer here. Now, when you have locked layers, it will fade them, and that will tell you that they're locked. So you can adjust that here. You can make them not faded at all, or go all the way up to 90% where they're very faint. Or you can just turn the feature completely off. That's up to you. I typically will turn that off because I don't lock a lot of layers very often anyway. But when I do, I still want to be able to see them. So that's a lot of the layer commands that you have right here in the tab on the ribbon. A lot of these down here you're not going to use very often. These are the majority of the layers you're going to use as you have to navigate through your drawing and create different line work and objects. Turning layers off and on, freezing them, thawing them, isolating your layers is part of the drafting process in AutoCAD. The layer manager in AutoCAD is a palette, and it's the main format for creating and maintaining your drawing's layers. Here you can change the state of a layer, create new layers, delete layers, and change the properties of a layer. To get to it, the easiest way is to type LA on your command line and press enter. This will open up the Layers Property Manager palette. Once open, it works just like any other palette, and you can dock it or move it around, however you want to do. Any changes you make in the Layer Manager are completed in real time. That means as soon as you change the layer property or state, your drawing is instantly updated. And this allows you to keep the Layer Manager open at all times. Let's move it over and shrink it down. Now you can see the drawing that I have here, and I have 3 main drawing layers in it, though there are 6 layers altogether in my file. As I make changes to the layers in the Layer Manager, my drawing will instantly be updated. So for the wall, if I change the color, just by clicking here and clicking a new color, okay, all my walls are now red. That's why you want to draw everything to a bi-layer state, because then the layer will control everything, and it makes it so easy. I don't have to select any of those objects, but I can change it to a red line that's hidden. in just a few steps. There you go. Now you can see here that there are a lot of things that you can work with in the layer manager. These are the names of all the layers. When I pick the box that says name, it will aggregate that list either from A to Z or Z to A. Now this column here is the status. It tells me which one is current. I can double click anywhere on one of these in the status or names column to activate that layer or to make it current. The one with a check by it makes it current. If I pick it one time, I'm selecting it. I can hold down the control key and pick different ones. If I click it again, it will unselect it. So now when I do something here, it will do that to all of these layers. So I can make all of these layers have a continuous line type. My drawing is updated. I can turn them all green. And now all of those objects are green. Of course, I can undo that with my undo command. So you have status, you have name, you have if it's on or off. So I can click here. I can turn off a layer. I still have these selected, so I turned all of them off. But if I pick in one spot now, it'll just affect only that one. I can freeze the layer. I can lock it. And you can see it sort of fades it back. And when you move over that object, it kind of puts that little padlock looking icon. I can't even select the object so much. I mean, I can, but I can't delete it. It won't let me. I can't change it. I can't do anything to it. So when you get line work that you need to have set, locked in, then we'll lock it down. And you can sort any of these columns by their specific type or function just by clicking on it in ascending or descending order. I can sort by color, I can sort by line type, line weight, etc. So the color is pretty straightforward as well. I just pick in the box here or anywhere on there, and it brings up my select color window. There are a lot of colors here. There are 255 specific or standard colors that I can pick from. Most of them that you're going to use are right here. Colors 1 through 9. 7 is the color white. And that goes back and forth between white and black. That depends on your background color on your screen. Right now my screen color is black, so it makes it white. Now if my background was white, it would be black. So that's just a relative color. But when you print to this color, it will always be black. That's the color ink that would be used. Now in this case, you have color 250, which is a faded color. It's just a little bit less than 100% of black. And down even more, all the way down to an almost not even there. So if you want to draw something that's kind of not there, you would use 255. So these are the most common colors that you're going to use right here. Now, you can pick any one of these other colors to make it current, and they have a specific number. So like this is number 79. This form of yellow or shade of yellow is number 50. So I can type in any of the numbers in this box. If I want it to be the standard red, I can just type in the number 1. Click OK, and it's still red. Line types are a little bit different. I just click on it. Whatever's loaded into my file, I can use. Just select it, click OK, and it changes that line type to that line type. Double click on it to open this up. If I don't have the line that I want here, I can click Load, and here are all the standard AutoCAD line types. You have a bit of a preview and description for that line type, and then the name right here. This is the source file. You can customize line types. We're not going to get into that now, and I recommend that you stick with the standard line types as much as possible. Otherwise, anytime you send a file to somebody, you also have to send them that customized line type file. Otherwise, their lines won't work. So you can have dots, you can have dashes, you can have phantom lines. Some of them even have a little bit of text into them. This will say gas. This will say HW for hot water, etc. The majority of the lines you're going to use are going to be continuous, hidden, dashed, phantom, etc. Now, the line weight controls the thickness of the line in millimeters when you go and print your drawing. You can set it to default, which is just a thin standard, or you can set it down to the thinnest line, which measures at 0 millimeters, or the thickest setting, which is 2.11 millimeters. So these get pretty thick. The majority of the time, you're going to be around 0.15 millimeters up to about 1 millimeter. Really thick lines will be 2 millimeters. Now, there's a setting called transparency in AutoCAD. It works just like color, line type, line weight, but it makes an object transparent or translucent. That means you can see through it. So you just click it here. You have different numbers in increments of 10 all the way up to 90%. Now, these are percentage or degrees of transparency. So a setting of 0 means it is 0 transparency. That has no transparency whatsoever. It's completely solid. Then 90 means 90% of that object is transparent. So you can only see 10% of it. So the higher the number, the less of it you're going to see. And that you can control by layer. As you can see, I set that to 90. And, well, they are very hard to see. Extremely so. It's there. I'm not sure you can see it on the recording, but it is. So let's cut that back to 50. There, now it's a little bit more prevalent. That's nice when you want to, ghost something back. Meaning that you want the line there, but you want to, not put emphasis on it. So you fade it back. And that's one way you can do that with the transparency. Now, you can have something that doesn't print out. It's called no plot. That's what this setting here does. Like this case right here, it won't plot. Now it will because I clicked it. Click it again, it won't plot. We use that with viewports quite a bit. A viewport is sort of a window from your paper space to your model space, so it brings it in. You don't want to see that line work that shows your shape, that's your window, but you need to know where it is while you're working in AutoCAD. That way it will define it, but not commit you to the line work. This last section here will be a new viewport freeze. That means if you select this, whenever someone creates a new viewport, which we'll talk about in another section, the viewport will have that layer frozen. So if you're working on something specific on a small area of your drawings for the whole project that you don't want other people to necessarily include, this is great for revision work. So let's say you've done your project, you've submitted it in, and now you're coming back with a change, and you don't want it to show up in your other drawings by accident. So you put it on a new layer, and you say new viewport freeze. So anytime someone makes a new viewport or it comes in, it's not going to be turned on. It'll be off, so the line work won't show up. And this last column is a description. Here you can put in a description. In this case, this is a wall. You just click in here, and you can say, just type in whatever you want. Contains all building walls. There you go. That helps because it can get kind of complicated every once in a while on what a layer really is. So this can help you better define and to leave notes for people on what you've done here. You can click here, make a new layer. Click here to freeze all of them in the viewport, to delete them, or to make one current. You can make drawing layers invisible either by turning them off or by freezing them. We've briefly mentioned them in the last few sections, but I want to take a better look at them so you can better understand when you want to thaw something or when you want to turn it off. Turning off or freezing layers is a very useful thing to do if you need an unobstructed view when working in detail on a particular layer or set of layers, or if you don't want to plot out details such as reference lines or other things like that. And whether you choose to freeze layers or turn them off depends on how you work and on the size of your drawing. Turning layers on and off. Well, if you do that, then an object that's turned off or that's on a turned off layer, they're invisible, but they will still hide objects when you use the hide option. When you turn layers on and off, the drawing is not regenerated. Now, freezing and thawing something, that's a little bit different. Objects on frozen layers are still invisible, just like when they're off, but they do not hide other objects. Most of the hiding thing has to do with 3D objects. You can have hidden lines, you can hide things behind them when you look at certain isometric views, such as that. So that in a 2D drawing, the hide part doesn't really come into a lot of play, and it doesn't, especially in AutoCAD LT. But in large drawings, freezing unneeded layers speeds up operations involving, displaying them and regenerating your drawing. Thawing one or more layers can cause the drawing to be regenerated. Freezing and thawing layers will also take more time than turning layers on and off. What does that all really mean? Well, that bit of information that I just gave you just discusses how AutoCAD handles frozen or off layers. It used to be a real big deal back when we worked in AutoCAD in DOS, and your processor just took a long time to generate on your screen all of these lines that you had. You would turn things off or just freeze them instead because it just handled it differently. It didn't process them even though they weren't there. Well, that's not as much of a case now. Our big processors with our tons of RAM in them can handle these things. And ever since Paperspace was introduced way back in AutoCAD 11, we're on version I think 28 or 29 now with 2013, the freezing gave you more options in the viewports, and we'll talk about those. In a layout or in Paperspace, which is down on the tab down here, now this is a viewport. And in this viewport, you can double click and that will activate it. Do a zoom extents and you can see your object right here. If I zoom or pan, move around, I can see what's going on. Now in this viewport or any viewport, I can freeze layers individually. So that means I can freeze them so that I can't see them in this viewport at all. But if I have another viewport, they'll stay there. Let me show you. If I copy this viewport, I didn't copy the line work. I only have one set of line work. This viewport is a window to what's in model space. When I make changes to my objects in model space, for example, like deleting this door, that's reflected in my viewports. See, there's no door here, there's no door there. I can double click in either one of these viewports, and now what I do to the line work, if I delete it, move it, or etc., then it'll show up over here as well. So I can select this door. As you can see, it's been picked here. Delete. It's gone in both places. Now let's say I don't want to see the doors at all. I can go up to my freeze button, select the door, and now they're frozen in this viewport, but not in this one. That's where freezing comes into play. Now if I go to model space and I freeze them here, let's say I freeze the walls. Can't see the walls, they're still there, I just can't see them. They're frozen everywhere. What you do in model space gets reflected back into paper space. So you have to be careful. So now I have to come back, go to one of my layers. I can go to the layer manager, or I can go to this pull down right here, pick the button, and it will thaw my layers. So that's something else you can do here besides picking the current one. I can lock them, I can unlock them, I can freeze them, I can turn them off. So now you'll see here when I go back to my Layout 1 tab, everything's back on. But if I click the freeze button, pick the walls, my walls and doors are frozen. You can't see them here, but I can see them here. Now that's really cool. That gives you a lot of different options. So I can display my drawing differently by controlling them with layers. If I didn't use the layers to control the way they looked, I couldn't do this. So that's very important. So you saw when the wall layer was locked and how it hovered over there, I couldn't select it. Let's lock them back. It fades them back a little bit. But now I can pick them, but I can't do anything with it. I can't move them. I can pick them to begin with, but then I can't use a command on them. Then if I start a command, I can't pick them. So these walls are safe. I can't get rid of them. That's nice. Now, if you find that you don't like this fading back, which I personally don't like either, there are a couple things you can do with that. I can come up here. I can turn that feature off altogether. See, so now I still can't delete these objects, but that's okay. Or if I turn it back on, I can decrease the amount of fadedness, so to speak, whatever floats your boat. I personally just prefer leaving it turned off. The locked layers, even though they're faded back, will still print normally. That won't affect it at all. That's just a visual representation or a visual cue to let you know that the layer is locked. You can also see it by hovering over the object, and you get that little padlock of an icon that shows up in your crosshairs. That'll tell you too. One last thing. If I'm in a viewport, or just in paper space in general, if I want to turn off, not freeze, and I zoom in here, say to this window, that will turn it off in that viewport too. They won't turn it off over here as well. So freezing and thawing in the viewport are done in the viewport. When I come to model space and I turn off, let's turn off everything here in model space. You can see it's turned off here as well. So what you're going to want to do while you're working is leave everything on, leave everything thawed in model space. Unless you're working in it. If you're working in it, you've got to isolate something, that's okay. Put it all back to the way it was before, and then come to your viewport and you can freeze the things there that you need frozen for when you print your drawing. Most of the time you're drawing, you won't have a layer you need or want to use. That happens. To eliminate this issue, I recommend that you start every new drawing with a template file. That'll have most of your common layers already in it that you're going to use. Just maintain that template file, keep it up to date, and when you develop or make new layers, make sure you include it in there, especially if it's one you feel that you're going to use often. But regardless of how you started your file, you're still going to need to make a new layer from time to time. That process is actually quite simple. Open up the Layer Manager, type in LA on the command line. That's the easiest way to do it, or just leave it open all the time. If you have more than one screen, which is the way I do my work every day, I have multiple screens. I keep my Layer Manager open all the time. I never close it. That's how often you're going to be working in your Layer Manager. If nothing else, it helps to make something current. I can just scroll through my list, double click, and there you go. So that one's current. But to make a new layer, it's actually quite simple. The easiest way is to start with a layer that has the most objects or settings in common with what you want to do. Just click on this icon right here to make a new layer, or press Alt+N. We'll give it a name called Layer 1. If you already have a Layer 1, it'll call it Layer 2. If you have a Layer 2, it'll call it Layer 3, etc. Now you can see that it copied all the settings from my Windows layer. Very simple. And that's great. Now, a lot of your layers are going to have the exact same settings. That's okay. You don't have to change them. Just do what you need to do. That's done, having different layers with the exact same settings on it, because they're going to be used to organize different types of objects. So this is called Windows. Maybe my new layer is called Windows-Bay, because we're going to put in some bay windows, and we want them on their own layer. But we want them to print the same, with the same color, same continuous line type, same line weight, same transparency, etc. That's going to happen all the time. In fact, you're going to use a lot of the same line weights. The colors will typically just be used to help you differentiate visually what the objects are on your screen. You can also print directly to those colors, but most of the time you're probably just going to print to the color black, and that's okay too. When you create your new layer, you can do it however you need to. If it's selected in here, taking over some of these settings, or you can just create one and then change everything all that you want. It's very easy to make a new layer, and to edit them, it's just as easy. So once you've created it, you can click on the color, change it to green or whatever color you want, change it to a different line type, different thickness. Click OK. Editing a layer is very easy. And you can edit multiple layers at the same time. If you hold down the Control button, you can click on as many layers as you want. Or if you click on one, hold down the Shift key, and it will pick every layer between the two layers that you selected. Once they're all selected, you can make the changes to all of them at the same time, and it will apply your change to all of those layers. There you go. Just pick one layer again. And remember, when you're picking the layers, pick them over here in the name or in the status. Otherwise, if I pick over here, it's going to open up my color change, and that's what it's going to want. If you only need to edit the color of one layer, then that's fine. Click it, change the color, and there you go. That's a quick way, and it reduces or eliminates one step of picking again, picking, or I can just go 1 click, 2 click, 3 click. So it's going to take off 1 or 2 clicks. But that's all you have to do to create a new layer or to edit a layer. Perhaps one of the biggest issues when creating drawings on a computer is making sure they turn out the way you want them to on paper. That is where good layer management and layer use comes in. The purpose of layers is to organize the data in your file so that you can work with it, and so that it has a correct visual display on paper, not just the screen. Because who cares ultimately what it looks like on the screen? That's not what you're giving your client. You're giving your client the drawings. Yeah, okay, sometimes a CAD file goes along with it, but the drawing is where you make your money, so it needs to be correct. Layers control how an object looks, but you can override a layer's settings on any object by assigning that object a color, line type, line weight, transparency, etc. Well, don't do this. I would love to tell you to never, ever, ever do this, but there will be a rare occasion when it's appropriate. But they're extremely rare. The 3 keys to good object visual display management in AutoCAD are 1, by layer, number 2, by layer, and number 3, by layer. Every object can be either assigned its properties individually, or it can be assigned by layer. The 3 main display properties an object can have or set to are color, line weight, and line type. Each layer can have all of these properties set as well. And transparency is another one if you use that. It's a good practice to keep all of your objects set to by layer. That allows you to control them in your viewports. Viewports are windows in paper space that look at model space. We've kind of looked at this already, but I want to go over it one more time. In this file, go to the paper space tab named Layout 1, and I'm in the Architectural Example Imperial Drawing file. Open up the Layer Manager, type LA on the command line. That'll take you right to it. Now, if you make changes here, then the changes are made everywhere. We only want to change the objects, though, in a specific part of our drawing. We can make a detailed view of any part of our window here, of one of our doors, or a combination of a wall joint or anything. And so sometimes, though, you want to make other things faded back or to be dashed or not shown at all. And that's okay. You don't want to have to make a new file for all of that. You can do that right here. To do that, you have to edit the layers while in an activated viewport. Since these are all drawn to by layer, we can make the change here. Double-click in your viewport. Make sure it's locked. Click on the button here. If it looks like this, a yellow unlocked lock, that means you can mess things up. It means I can zoom it in, pan around, and, well, it's all messed up. Well, if you find that you've done that, just undo. Then click on the button here, unlock it again. This will keep the scale right and everything. So if I double-click in here, this will be my viewport. It'll be highlighted. Everything will be constrained inside that viewport. I can still, since I've locked it, zoom in and out and pan around, and I don't affect the scale of my drawing or the view. But now I'll open up the Layer Manager. And now you're managing what's in this viewport. I have all my regular controls here, but now I have all of them once again. See, these are called, off, freeze, lock, color, line type, line weight, transparency, plot, etc. But now I have viewport freeze, viewport color, viewport line type, viewport line weight, etc. They're the exact same things, and they work the exact same way, and they're changed the exact same way as before. But only now I can change my walls in this viewport alone to, let's go with a pink color. See, they're pink here. If I double click outside the viewport, I close my layer manager so it's out of the way. You can see I made them pink here, and that's only in this viewport. If I go back to model space, see there's still this ugly brown color. Now, who wants brown walls anyway? But I can do that. If I copy this viewport, it takes on the same settings as in this viewport. So if I double click inside it to activate it, open up my layer manager, I can scroll across here and change my walls to any other color. I don't change the line work at all. I just change the way it's set to in the layer. I'm controlling the visual display of these layers so that I can show it differently. Now, why would I want to change the color? Well, maybe I need it to print differently, in green instead of in pink. Or maybe I'm using what's called a CTB file to control my line weight and not the layer manager. And green prints out lighter and I need that to be faded back. That's another option or another reason to do it. If I unlock this and I zoom in to right here to make a detail of some sort, lock it back so that I can zoom in and pan around. Now I can work in here. Since these are different colors, I don't have to change the line work at all. I can just leave it the same and just display it in a different way. And when I go to print this out, it'll look different. And I can make more drawings from one set of line work much easier, much more quickly, and without messing up my original work.